So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us, joining the world's principled leaders. Today, this is myself, Lord Hastings, coming to you from London, and also Boyd Craig, my co-professor from the Stephen R. Covey Center at the Huntsman Business School, Utah State University. Today, our very special guest is Chaplain Black, who is chaplain of the US Senate, a man at the center of thinking, decisions, and direction. We're so grateful for his presence with us. Chaplain Black, welcome.
Thank you very much, Lord Hastings.
And over to you to tell us what is at the center of your mind as you speak to students and you think of young people and their future and the principles they need to live by. Just give us your reflections.
Well, I never expected to be a leader. I am a loner by nature. I grew up in the toxic pathology of an inner city ghetto in Baltimore, Maryland, and I found a city of refuge in the library. And so I literally spent my summers when I was 8, 9, 10 years of age reading Epictetus, Boethius, Kant, Aquinas' Summa Theologica. I remember, I guess I was about 8 or 9, and I was reading a book on marriage by T.H. Van de Velde called Ideal Marriage. And I asked the librarian how to pronounce a word that begins with a C. And she was apoplectic. She grabbed the book from me and said, "Little boy, what are you doing reading a book like this?" But that was my basic life. And so I was a little like David, who was in the pasture, tending the flock and writing love poetry to God. And God was looking for a leader. King Saul was no longer obedient to God. And God said through the prophet Samuel in 1 Samuel chapter 15 and 16, God has sought for and found a man after his own heart. So I would say to each of you students, each of you can be prepared for the transcendent to select you for leadership, because that is essentially what happened to me. Now, I just want to make some suggestions on how you can prepare for the transcendent to select you for leadership. First, you need to work on the internal more than the external. We like leaders who look a certain way, tall, dark, and handsome, I guess, is one of the ways of looking at it. 1 Samuel 16:7 says, human beings look on the outward appearance, God looks at the heart. David was so unimpressive in terms of his physical bearing, although I don't think he was a Lilliputian, but he was so unimpressive in his physical bearing that when he was brought before the king in 1 Samuel chapter 17 to fight Goliath, when he walked in, Saul said, King Saul, "You're not able to fight him." David hadn't spoken a word. "You're not able to fight him," just in terms of his looks. But David said, "Your servant kept his father's sheep and killed a lion and a bear." So be concerned about the internal more than the external, because God looks at the heart. Secondly, expect God to prepare you for leadership in your life experiences. Little did I know when I was in that library reading, ingesting all of this amazing wisdom as a child, that I would be using much of this to talk with United States senators who may not have a biblical worldview. So even if you are a person of faith, you need to be prepared to translate the language of faith in such a secular way that people who may not believe in God can embrace what you have to say because you are articulating truth. So that is what you need to expect God to be preparing you for. You will encounter the equivalent of a lion trying to take one of your sheep. You will encounter the equivalent of a bear trying to take one of your sheep, even though you are too young to be conscripted in the army of Israel. And you can use those experiences as your bona fides when you are making a case for doing what no one else wants to do. Remember, the Bible says about Israel, all of Israel trembled and was afraid. But the third and the most important part of being prepared to be selected by the transcendent is, young folk, older folk, you need reverential awe. Okay, you need reverential awe. It's described this way in Proverbs 9:10, the fear of the Lord, and that's talking about reverential awe, is the beginning of wisdom. Reverential awe was what Joseph had. Remember, God was looking for a prime minister for Egypt, and Joseph was working for Mr. Potiphar when Mrs. Potiphar tried to seduce Joseph. Joseph had such reverential awe. He said in Genesis 39, verse 9, how then can I do this, check this out, great wickedness and sin against God? He reminded Mrs. Potiphar, you're married, just in case you've forgotten. Your husband, he has trust in me. He has delegated every responsibility in this home to me. The only thing he wants to know is, give me the menu and let me choose that, but everything else you choose. How can I dishonor the God who has given me these opportunities? Reverential awe. I was trained in chaplain school that sailors use profanity. Barry, grow up. Don't be a prude. Don't have people thinking, look, who is this guy with this crazy? Doesn't he understand what the real world is about? That was my training, 12 weeks of training to be a chaplain. I enter the Navy ministry. I'm on an aircraft carrier, and an admiral, I'm a lieutenant, an admiral takes the name of my God in vain. Now, I wouldn't let you take the name of my mother in vain. I'm from the inner city. I'm from the hood, as we say. I would not let you take the name of my mother in vain, let alone my God. Here I was, an 03, okay? You would call it a lieutenant, okay? Here I am, and I'm looking at the equivalent of a brigadier general, okay? And I said, excuse me, sir. If you speak those words again to me, I will leave your presence without your permission, sir. He looked at me as if I had grown a third eye, but I didn't care because I had enough reverential awe that I do with me what you must, but I refuse to let you talk about my God. Remember, it was reverential awe that prompted David, when Goliath was uttering his bellicose verbiage, to say, here's a teenager, who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should cry out against the armies of the living God? Okay. And when David went to fight Goliath, by the way, not with Saul's armor, but with a slingshot, he said, 1 Samuel 17, beginning with verse 45, You come to me with a sword and a spear and a shield, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts. Now David is beginning to sound delusional. This day, God will give you, really, David, you into my hands, and I will give your flesh to the fowl of the field and the birds of the air. Now check this out. That the whole earth, this teenager is talking global stuff, that the whole earth will know. This is reverential awe. That the Lord saves not with sword or spear or shield, but that the battle belongs to God. My young friend, if you want to be selected by the transcendent, prepared to be selected by the transcendent, work on that internal stuff. God is more concerned for what is on the outside. Be writing your love poetry to God when no one is seeing you in the meadow, shoveling sheep dung, okay? The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom then shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Whom then shall I be afraid? Why do the heathens rage and the people imagine a vain thing against the Lord and against his anointed? The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell therein. He that dwelleth in the secret places of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in the time of trouble. Therefore shall not we fear, though the earth be removed, and though the mountains be buried into the midst of the sea. This is the love poetry that a teenager was writing as he defended his sheep against lions and bears. I got to be honest with you. A lion comes from one of my sheep. Bon appetit, okay? But David defended his sheep for a lion and a bear. He developed himself internally. Oh, yes, he had, okay? And he trusted the unfolding of God's providence to the extent of the reverential awe that he had for God. And he refused to let an uncircumcised Philistine profane the name of the God he loved. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Well, Dr. Black, you have an aura around you, not just of an immense, deep love of the Bible and the truth of the Bible, but also that you've absorbed this into your very chemistry. I mean, when you look back on your life, are you surprised you are where you are now?
When I look back, I'm not. I would have been surprised as I navigated through life. But my mother, when I was 8 years of age, she was a domestic, and she was given the only record that anyone has ever given. It was a record. Someone will explain to young people what a record is. But it was a record of Peter Marshall, a narration record, the 57th chaplain of the United States Senate. I'm the only African American to ever be selected as the chaplain of the United States Senate. So the idea of ever being the chaplain of the Senate never even entered my mind. But I played that record repeatedly, a Scott. And I knew this guy is not from our neighborhood. I played the record, a sermon, Were You There? And on the flip side, Compromise in Egypt, until I'd memorized the narrative. The morning sun had been up for some hours over the city of David. Pilgrims and visitors were pouring in through the gates, mingling with merchants from villages round about. Shepherds were coming down from the hills, and the narrow street. I just memorized, there were the aged stooped with years, muttering to themselves as they pushed through the throng. There were children playing in the streets, calling to each other in shrill voices. It was lyrical. I was drawn to it, but I had no idea that God was positioning me to follow in his train, and I would be the 62nd chaplain of the United States Senate because of the unfolding of God's prevailing providence. Joseph did not know that he was supposed to be prime minister until he looked back and was able to say to his brothers in Genesis 50, verse 20, "You meant it for evil when you sold me into slavery, but God meant it for good, to enable me to save many people alive," says Joseph in the arcane King James Version. So it's looking back that I realize, as Juan L. Harris sings, "So you were in it after all." I see the hand of God. And I would say to the young people, that same God desires to guide your life. And Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not upon your own understanding. In all your ways, seek to be in his will, and he will direct your path." Stephen Covey would call that sharpening the saw, one of his very, very important principles. Covey would also call that beginning with the end in mind. If you want to navigate through life, let God take care of the ending. And by trusting him, by seeking to be in the circle of his will, you know that he is going to bring you to a destination that, in the words of Ephesians 3:20, is immeasurably, abundantly above all that you can ask or imagine.
When you wrote your book, From the Hood to the Hill, and you subtitled it "A Story of Overcoming," what did you feel you had to overcome, or what overcome for you?
I did not shake hands with a non-African American until my 16th birthday. I literally lived in a segregated world. In fact, it was redlining. Okay, I think in fact, here's a picture of the first time I shook hands. The first time I shook hands with a white person. Okay, and it was because I won an oratorical contest that no African American had ever won. Now, little did I realize that God had this in mind when I was shaking hands. So I had to catapult those hurdles. Okay, here I am in the Situation Room of the White House praying during a crisis. Okay, with the previous president. So I had to overcome that hurdle. I had to. I was born when Brown v. the Board of Education, the 1954 Supreme Court decision, was being implemented with all deliberate speed. So when I went to university in Alabama, I could not even attend a church if the people didn't look like me. Okay, and so these were hurdles. There were not, I couldn't go to an Ivy League school, okay? I came just before Princeton and Harvard and Cornell and the schools that my children were able to matriculate at, those schools opened. It was unavailable. So I had to get through all of that. And yet I was guided by that unfolding providence that I talked about, and God had placed a marker in my life. When I wrote From the Hood to the Hill, the publisher, the editor at Thomas Nelson said, "We love it. We like the way it's written. We have one question, Dr. Black. Is this fiction or nonfiction? I said, it's an autobiography. They said, well, that may seem like a strange question. They said, but we asked that question because if we were writing fiction, the plot would not be plausible. Mm-hmm. For someone to hear the record of the chaplain of the United States Senate and then grow up out of the toxic pathology of the inner city to become still the only African-American admiral in the history of the United States Navy Chaplain Corps. And then before he retires, becomes the only African-American chaplain of the United States Senate. When he has memorized it, they said, that would look too much like Superman on Krypton with all of it. It wouldn't make any sense. But since it actually happened, we're going to run with it. So this is, Lord Hastings, what I'm talking about when I'm saying God is able to do, not just for me, but for anyone who is listening to me, more, Ephesians 3:20, than you can ask or imagine. If you can think it, God's plan for you is bigger than that.
Professor Craig, I know you have one or two things you want to ask.
Thank you, Dr. Black. You spoke in your opening remarks to our students about focusing on the inward first before the outward. I wonder what you've seen in the many leaders you've associated with on the Hill and the White House that reveals of their inner character. What principles have you seen in action that are common to the most enduringly influential leaders in our country?
Well, Dr. Boyd, I have seen, for one thing, a senator who in my 18 years on Capitol Hill has missed only one of my Bible studies. I have a weekly Bible study, and has missed only one prayer breakfast. We have a weekly prayer breakfast in 18 years. And he missed the prayer breakfast and the Bible study because of the funeral of a family member. His spirituality dwarfs my own. I have seen in my 18 years lawmakers assemble from both sides of the aisle on a weekly basis, and they still do, at a weekly prayer breakfast. One of the lawmakers, a senator, gives an address regarding his or her faith pilgrimage, and then the lawmakers join hands at the end of the prayer breakfast every week and pray together. And that's been going on for 18 years. C-SPAN cameras are never there, obviously. But so there is a layer of spirituality that I see that others don't see. Paul said in Philippians 4, there are saints in Caesar's household. So there are spiritually fit lawmakers who demonstrate their spirituality in their behind the scenes interaction. And I am just vivified, quite frankly, by their exemplary conduct.
Thank you. One other question. Our students come from every possible background. Many are believers, believe in God. They're Christians, Muslims, Jews, Buddhists, and others have no belief in God. Mm-hmm. As someone who's dedicated himself as a follower of Jesus, what can they and we learn? What's one primary thing we could learn from Jesus and his life that informs a future leader?
Well, one of the most astonishing things Jesus ever said is in John 8:29. And he said, I always do the things that please my Father. Wow. I always do the things that please my Father. And so I would challenge an individual, whether he or she has a faith or not, you need something that you can commit your life to, okay? Martin King once said, those who haven't found something worth dying for are not fit to live. Augustine in his Confessions talks about the hole in our lives. It's a God-shaped void. He says, you have made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until we find peace in you. There's a reason why the Rolling Stones sing, I can't get no satisfaction, okay? If multi-millionaire rock stars have a hole inside of them, maybe we need to take Blaise Pascal, maybe we need to take him up on his wager, you know? Why not gamble on the transcendent? We had a noted American agnostic, Robert Ingersoll, and at the funeral of his brother was a former member of Congress, and at the funeral, Ingersoll ended with a very pessimistic peroration, but then he did a U-turn. He said, life is a narrow veil between the cold and barren peaks of two eternities. We strive in vain to peer beyond its heights. We cry aloud, and the only answer is the echo of our wailing cry. And then he dropped his head, and then barely above a whisper, he said, from the voiceless lips of the unreplying dead, there comes not a sound. Yet even in the night of death, hope sees a star, and listening love hears the rustling of angels' wings. I think there is something in us that hungers for the transcendent. The poet William Cullen Bryant, watching geese migrate southward, cried out, God, who from zone to zone guides through the boundless skies their certain flight. In the long road that I must walk alone, will lead my steps aright. There are enough clues just in nature to make us gamble, take Pascal's weight. Pascal basically says, what do you have to lose? If there is no God, you lose nothing. But if there is, and Louis Armstrong, many of you Brits may not know him, great American jazz artist. And he sang a song, his gravelly voice, I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and you. And I say to myself, what a wonderful world. I say to myself, what a wonderful world. Oh, yes. Listen. The birth of a child would be enough to push me from the boundary, over the boundary of disbelief to believing in probably the most consequential figure in history. Someone has said of Jesus of Nazareth, well, one of your Oxford dons, C.S. Lewis, said, He was either Lord, liar, or lunatic. Mere Christianity. Lewis's book. Philip Brooks, the great American preacher, New England, said of Jesus, all of the armies that have ever marched, all of the navies that have ever sailed, all of the parliaments that have ever sat, all of the kings and queens that have ever reigned, have not made the impact upon humankind as has that one solitary life. If you can't believe in the God of C.S. Lewis or the God of Barry Black or the God of Craig Boyd or Lord Hastings, believe in the God of Einstein. Believe in the God of Spinoza. Believe in the God of Aquinas. Believe in what you see all around you, for the heavens declare his glory. That's what I would say to those individuals.
Thank you, Dr. Black, for your service to the world as a light in our seat of government. Back to you, Lord Hastings.
Well, Dr. Black, you have enlivened our spirits, challenged us deeply at the core with that founding point about working on the inside and holding to these fundamental principles of readiness, of mind and spirit and being, and trusting vividly in God's determination.
And
Thank
reverential
you.
awe, Lord Hastings, reverential awe. That's the start, yes.
That's the start. It is. That is exactly why we come before he who is the greatest of all.
Yes.
And with that, we're deeply grateful. Thank you for giving us your time today. And thank you for joining with us in the world's principled leaders.
It has been my honor. Thank you so much. God bless you.
Thank you, Dr. Black.
Bless
God
you.
bless you.
Bye-bye.